Welcome back to Combat Mission, where we are going to have a think about vehicle mobility. Every time I do a unit guide, I gloss over mobility because it's difficult to nail down in a useful way. Saying that a unit can travel at X kilometers per hour is great, but that number is going to vary depending on the terrain and the ground conditions, and the tactical utility of travelling at that speed is entirely situational. So what I'm really looking for is a way to contextualize the mobility of vehicles. Given that battlefields, time periods and conditions vary so much, I think the best way to do that is to compare them with one another. This is not a fantastic way of doing it, but by putting vehicles through the same tests, we can start to make some general judgments about their performance, where they do well, where they don't, and which ones perform better or worse than others. To that end, I've built a trial vehicle course in Combat Mission Black Sea to try and nail down some characteristics. The idea is to try and be at least somewhat scientifically rigorous to get a level playing field, so everything is starting from a standing start, and I've used objectives to mark the beginning route and finishing positions of each section of the course. It's not perfect, but it's probably as close as I'm going to get. To begin with, we've got a pair of straightforward speed tests, 1,000 meters in a straight line on a paved road and 1,000 meters in a straight line on grass. Third, we have a slalom. This is about judging the turning ability of vehicles. The idea is to follow the dirt track as closely as possible and time how long it takes to get from one end to the other. Fourth, we've got some lumps and bumps. We want to see how well our vehicle can cope with going up and down some increasingly tall and steep slopes. Fifth, we have a crater field. 4 bands of increasingly large craters to see how much rough surfaces like these slow us down. Sixth, we have some bands of difficult terrain. Light forest tiles, then mud, then shallow fords, and finally a shallow ford with mud on either side. The effects of this one are a little harder to quantify because of the impact of bogging. While some vehicles are more likely than others to get bogged or even immobilized, it's still pretty random. So the idea here is to run 3 vehicles through it at the same time, average the speed, using the highest time for any immobilized vehicles, and record how many times they bog. Not great, but it should give a rough indication of a vehicle's performance in this kind of terrible terrain. Seventh, we've got some obstacles to tackle. A fence, a hedge, a low stone wall, and a barbed wire obstacle. This isn't about timing, this is about whether the TAC AI of the vehicle will attempt to plow through the obstacles or pathfind its way around, which is the kind of thing that's nice to know before you give the orders. I did have a few more tests, which are still on the map, but after some initial trials, I don't think they're actually that useful. These are more on the tactical side of things, measuring how long it takes to pop in and out of keyhole and hull down positions. This is a really important metric, but I've tested 18 vehicles so far, and they're all within a second or two of each other, so it doesn't look like it's worth recording. Also of questionable value is the slope test. Not only does there not seem to be any noticeable increase or decrease in speed as vehicles go up and down the inclines, but when I ran another vehicle alongside on the flat, they both got to the end at the same time, so not sure how useful that is. To some extent, it doesn't matter that much though, because all the vehicles are running the same course. Adding the results up in seconds, we can generate some scores that give a rough performance indicator, and by swapping the map between games, we can test vehicles from different eras and see if they hold up. Of the 18 vehicles I've tested so far, 7 of them are tanks, so let's graph the results up to make them easy to read and take a look. Ordering them by score, with a lower score indicating better performance, we've immediately got a pretty obvious trend. We've got more modern tanks with better performance at the left, older World War II tanks with worse performance on the right, and slap bang in the middle, the only Cold War tank I tested. That makes sense. As time goes on, we'd expect vehicle performance to improve. This works at a fairly macro level. The Abrams, M60 and Sherman occupy the ends and middle of the graph, coming from 3 different eras, but it also looks like it's working at a more micro level. The T-72B3 and T-72AV are versions of the same tank, so their scores are pretty close, but the upgraded B3 variant is outperforming the older AV variant. Dead simple stuff, but it's a good indicator that the tests are producing the results that we would expect. Of course, having the results also gives us some threads to chase. Why did the M4A3 Sherman perform worse than the 3 World War II tanks? Diving into the data, everything is pretty comparable until we get to the difficult ground test. The Sherman averaged 201 seconds and bogged 8 times. The Panther and T-34 averaged 84 and 86 seconds respectively, bogging 3 and 2 times. So the Sherman is bogging more than the Panther and the T-34, which makes sense because it has narrower tracks, so it has a higher ground pressure. This was a problem that the US Army was working to solve by the end of the war. Shermans were being fitted with grousers to increase the width of their tracks and thereby decrease the ground pressure and improve mobility. So again, even though we're just doing comparative testing here, everything seems to be lining up pretty well. Now, I don't think this is perfect by any means, and it does seem like quite a lot of work to get a very generalized indication of vehicle mobility, but I also think it's better than skimming over the whole characteristic in the unit guides. If I can build up a good data set by doing more unit guides, the comparisons should start being quite useful. Anyway, that's it for this video. A little insight in how I'm going to start testing vehicle mobility in combat mission a bit more thoroughly. Hope you all enjoyed it and found it interesting. Any better ideas, let me know in the comments, and I'll catch you in the next video.